Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Black Scientists Cooperative podcast. Today, we are going to be covering some very juicy topics. We're going to discuss what are my rights as an employee, and can my employer force me or make me take the vaccine? Today, we have the honor of hosting a very special guest, Aisha Stanton. She is a registered nurse as well as a lawyer with an absolute stellar background. I'll let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself before we get started. So, Isha, can you tell us how you came to be?
Sure. Well, thank you all first for having me. It's my honor to be here today to speak to you all on this topic. Healthcare and law is something that I'm very passionate about. I tell people all the time I've affectionately married the two and couldn't be happier. I originally began my career in nursing in neonatal intensive care. Did that for a few years, worked in management, did some research as well along the way with that, and had this bright idea to go back to school for law. So I went and got my JD after that and have been working now in risk management for several years. I've had about 25 years almost in healthcare, which is crazy to think that it's been that long. But I truly did start very early in my career in healthcare, whether that was at the bedside, away from the bedside, and I've just kind of evolved from there. So these are two very things that I'm very, very passionate about.
Wonderful. Welcome. It's so good to have you on. So let's kick off our questions for this evening. Shantae, can you get us started?
Okay, so Aisha, a lot of people are still kind of in limbo whether or not they should take the vaccine, and I know that a lot of employers are encouraging it, but, as they're still continuing to doing, their own research and still thinking of the pros and cons of should they or should they not take it. The question is, can your employer mandate you to take the vaccine?
They actually can mandate you to take the vaccine. Of course, as we all know, the vaccine is very new, so it's not being mandated at this point. But employers do have that leverage to do that, fortunately or not. And the reason being for that is every employer has, under federal law, actually, they are held to the standard of providing a safe and healthy work environment. That's whether you have 5 employees, that's whether you have 5,000. So that's how they're able to be covered to mandate that. And of course, as we've seen, as we've researched, that the COVID virus does pose a health risk to those that are around you. So depending on your setting that you work in, whether that's industry, whether that's healthcare, whether that's small business, those environments pretty much are going to determine whether in the future, and don't know how soon that will be, whether they will truly mandate that, but they absolutely can do that in the interest of keeping other employers safe and then those that they come into contact with safe.
So on the other side of that, as an employee, what are my rights? Can I be fired? Can I be suspended from work? Can I be docked pay if I refuse? And do I have the right to refuse? And under what circumstances could I refuse?
That's a good question. And again, one of the great things about law is that there are always two sides to that, right? So as I mentioned before, the employers are covered under certain laws to protect their employees. Well, employees have rights as well. And so just some of those things that you mentioned, all of those kind of fall under a punitive umbrella, whether that's discipline by counseling, of course, loss of job. An employer definitely should not do that. Then they kind of violate many other laws and acts. I call them the alphabet soup. It's a grouping of, you've got CDC guidelines, you've got ADA, American Disabilities Act, you've got Title VII Civil Rights, you've got EEOC. It's just, the list goes on and on for those things that, we kind of all hear these terms, but they kind of work together to protect both sides. So employees, they do have rights. And one of the things that I think, is important to know, especially as we move forward with kind of working through the COVID vaccine and, who should get it, should it be mandated, should it be required, is that, again, the service industry that you work in, the exposure and risk that you pose for yourself and those that you work with, and the customers that you serve with that. Again, at the end of the day, the employee wants to be protected as well as the employer. And you would not want to create a rule within a business or a company that would unfairly cause hardship to your employees. You would not want to discriminate or exclude. Like I said before, you get into ADA and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act with that could pose a legal problem for them. You want to make sure that everybody's happy and healthy in their work environment. And there are sometimes, though, if it's a small business, that employer would have to weigh whether it's beneficial for them to require that, because then let's say they don't, and then half of their workforce gets sick with COVID at the same time. That could bring their business to a halt and be more detrimental for them. So again, the employer has that, umbrella or covering, so to speak, but the employee can also refuse if there are medical reasons, again, wouldn't want to make someone sicker or cause a different medical condition. So there are some waivers, exceptions, or qualifications that an employee could have that exemption, so to speak. Another exemption is also if they have a religious or philosophical belief that they don't believe in vaccination, they could also refuse.
I think that's a good point, Isha, because you have, there's a whole community who don't believe in any vaccinations, not just in the COVID vaccine, but they just don't believe in any.
Yes. It's so glad you mentioned that, because, you think about even our public education system, they're pretty much most schools that you try to find childcare or a public school, they're going to require a certain vaccination record, regardless of where you live in the U.S. And, there are some parents that absolutely refuse, but again, they have to find then alternative childcare or education for their child. Now, that doesn't mean that the government or there's a law saying that I have to vaccinate my child. No, it's the condition of participation actually is what it is. So, if that is well within your right, well within your choice. And again, these laws and mandates are made, with that in mind, so they don't take away those rights, those individual rights. But, there are rules that are that stand for education for certain jobs, and it truly is that a condition of participation or a condition of employment.
So I'm going to take us down a kind of a side street on this. And let's say, I've been vaccinated and I'm protected for all intents and purposes, but there's someone, that I care for at home that has the disease. So technically I've been exposed or not exposed, depending on the definition of that employer. Am I obligated to disclose that I'm caring for someone with COVID-19 in my home?
So again, it's strongly recommended for the benefit of others. Again, not so much a punitive or, repercussions from the employer standpoint for not doing that, but, there is that expectation, even according to the CDC guidelines, to disclose that information. One, so they can, kind of guide on how to isolate or quarantine at home. As you mentioned, you may or may not have close contact depending on what your home environment is, who that other person is that you've been exposed to. Again, the age range there could be from one end of the spectrum to another. That person may be asymptomatic at home. You all may be able to completely isolate, which again, is a recommendation that you kind of have a sick room, so to speak, at home, so that you're not sharing a bathroom, not sharing a bedroom. So even your quarantine or isolation time period would look different depending on, how you are potentially caring or coming into contact with that person. Again, your employer would expect you to share that so that they can take the necessary precautions and, guide you. Maybe they say, hey, stay home for 7 to 10 days or do telework. So many people are working from home now, so that doesn't mean that you're out of work. And then there are certain acts that have been implemented, of course, during the pandemic that even protect you in terms of payment for a certain period of time if you're having to care for someone. Similar to FMLA or Family Medical Leave Act, there's the Family First Corona Relief Act as well. So again, I will say that there's been a lot of work done, through regulation to try to meet the needs of both employers and employees.
So something you just said, sorry. I was just going to ask Isha if she could just briefly explain the difference between quarantine and isolation.
Okay, good question. So quarantine, you are coming out of kind of the community environment. When you're isolating, you are truly, like I mentioned before, you are having either that person that has the active coronavirus truly remaining in a room. They're not leaving out of the house, hopefully, and even leaving out of the room. Of course, go to the bathroom, take care of your daily activities, but limiting even the exposure of others within that area. Anytime they come out, they should have on a mask. Actually, both people should have on a mask, the person with the active virus, or others that are in the home or within that environment. And something that I think, too, just speaking of the isolation and quarantine, many people have to do like nebulizers or be on CPAP or have some type of forced or mechanical respiratory support within the home. Well, guess what? There's something called aerosolization that, of course, those droplets are coming out whenever they exhale. Like I said, there are many people that have to be on a CPAP machine at night or a BiPAP machine within their home, or even on just regular oxygen. So again, you'd want to isolate that person to a room when they are doing that. The person that's quarantining, of course, they can come and go a lot more safely with that. But that isolation, that's just truly having a more limited area and being more cautious with masks, gloves, and just hand hygiene. It's amazing what washing your hands can do as well. But you just want to make sure that you do all of those things in combination to keep, the one person that doesn't have the virus safe and help the other person recover.
Yeah. I just feel like, a lot of our viewers watching, just with the nature of how the pandemic came to be and the quickness or the speed in which the vaccine was developed and the fact that we're trying to get the economy back on track, it just all feels very forced and, in a way like we're being controlled. And so, I think it's just important for, our viewers to understand you still have a choice, right? You can choose to not take the vaccine. However, as Aisha said, as a condition of your employment, right? In order to maintain or keep your employment, keep your job, your employer can mandate that you take this vaccine. And, you know, it's really for the greater good of the entire environment, right? To keep the workplace safe for everyone that comes. And I think sometimes, even myself, we get comfortable working for other people. Most of us are at-will employees anyway, right? So at any given point, your employee can sever that relationship if they want to, right? So again, though, we still have rights, we still have choices, but ultimately the employer can mandate, and that's really good to know.
Yeah. And with that too, you know, it's again comparing that to flu vaccine, you know, tetanus for some jobs, you know, like I said, and definitely that whole grouping for schools and kids. Those mandates are weighted on whether that poses a direct threat to others and those that they serve. And I think it helps to have that perspective because, like you said, it's been fast. It's been a whirlwind year. And, you know, of course, this vaccine, you know, was created and produced in record time. So, you know, there are some understandable anxieties about taking it. But again, you know, it's been vetted and, you know, we're trying to believe in the science of it and do what's best for the greater good. And again, like I said, you know, there are certain laws and acts that protect both sides of that so that there is balance there. You know, it's not your employer making you do this or something came up again this year, you know, that they would have to make their employees make that decision unduly for them. And again, you know, even under usual circumstances, the employee still has the right to choose and, you know, do what's best for them. But again, know that you're doing that under certain conditions, you know, of your employer.
All right. Well, listen, Aisha, we want to thank you so much for joining us on the Black Scientists Cooperative. It has really been our pleasure to have you and to host you on here. You are most definitely an expert in our eye. And we'd love to have you back because as such, I'm sure we're going to get tons and tons and tons of questions around this topic and even more. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in to the Black Scientists Cooperative podcast, and we will see you on our next episode. Have a good night.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.